Vivek Ramaswamy made a dark prediction about what would happen if Donald Trump wins the upcoming presidential debate. But before we get into that, CNN released a new election analysis, which is pretty much in line with the video that I made yesterday. In that video, I predicted that Trump is poised to win the election with 287 electoral votes. And coincidentally, that's what CNN came up with. Let's take a look at the start of their segment.
Point out how close this race has been consistently close. All right, campaigns where any candidate led by at least 5 points in the polls. Look, most of the time there's at least some stretch where one of the candidates is ahead by at least 5 points. At least 3 weeks in which one candidate led by at least 5 points. That happened in every single campaign from 1964 to 2020. How many days have we had this campaign where one candidate was ahead by at least 5 points nationally? Look at this. 0 days. 0 days. The fact is this race has been consistently tight in a way that we have never seen before, Mr. Berman.
Look, Harry Enten is 100% correct. This has always been a tight race, and barring some black swan event like an economic crash or Kamala Harris cratering and crashing harder than Joe Biden did during the debate, this will likely be a tight race all the way to the end. So I would caution you to take with a grain of salt anyone who claims that this is a slam dunk for Donald Trump. I know there are a lot of YouTubers and a lot of sources, trying to manipulate and dig into the poll data. But reality is that this is just a tight race. That's not to say that Trump can't win a decisive electoral college victory. That is very much in the cards, and both Harry Enten and myself are saying that Trump can win, 287 electoral votes. But let's not kid ourselves. This is going to be a fight for every vote, and that's why Trump says, we need to make it too big to rig. Now, what's going to be important are the battleground states, and here is Harry Enten's analysis of that.
All right, the battleground polls that we're looking at. Give us some perspective on how close they are.
Sometimes we look at these 7 close states and, you see all these numbers that are up there and you go, I can't make heads or tails of it. So I just want to sort of combine them and look at the Democrat versus Donald Trump in those 7 closest battleground states. Look at the 2020 final margin and average across these 7 states. It was Biden plus 0.9 points. You don't think that could get any closer? We can, in fact, get closer. Look right now, Kamala Harris up, but get this, by just 0.6 points on average. Only about half a point, 0.6 of a point. My goodness gracious, that is how tight we are talking right now across these 7 battleground states.
So again, Harry is being even more jaded, more cynical, more bearish than I was in my assessment, and he still came to 287 electoral votes for Trump, potentially. Now, I get that there are a few people commented on yesterday's video saying, what if the pollsters are actually correct this time? What if they're actually accurate? Now, the reason I have doubts about that is because, yes, the pollsters missed in 2016, but don't forget, they thought that they accounted for everything in 2020. They were so certain. They assured us that they had learned their lessons from 2016. They adjusted their models, and that 2020 was going to be more accurate. Well, the 538 polling miss underestimated Trump even more. I get that you can argue that the RCP averages were closer in 2020, but they were still off by over 1 percentage point, which was Harry's more bullish case. And I think that's what's so hard to capture about the Trump coalition is because, remember yesterday, the Cheneys, both Liz and Dick Cheney coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris. We are seeing coalitions on both sides that, quite frankly, are unlike anything we've ever seen before. So I wouldn't be surprised if the polls are wrong yet again. I don't think necessarily it's that there's an issue with polling in general, because they tend to be closer, and in some cases spot on in the midterm elections, but maybe Trump is just a difficult candidate to poll because he's not a traditional Republican and he's not a traditional politician. Now, with that being said, obviously everyone is looking forward to the upcoming presidential debate. That is likely to be the last big inflection point, right? Barring some sort of black swan event, this is going to be the largest platform that both candidates have to speak to the entire country. If either this, I don't think that anyone wins a debate, but I think you can lose a debate. And what I mean by that is, if Trump performs, a 10 out of 10, he does the absolute best that he can, I don't think he's necessarily going to gain voters. But if he does horribly, I think he can lose support, and, his campaign is going to be in a much tougher position than it is now. And conversely, I think the same is true for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris can, recite all the scripts and lines that her consultants have pre-written for her and deliver those perfectly. But I don't think she's going to gain any swing voters from doing that. But if she goes on her word salad tangents and showcases a lack of presidential demeanor and just is mean-spirited and bullying towards Trump, I think she could totally derail. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy has a dark prediction for what would happen if Trump performs well at the debate. And the reason I'm taking this seriously is because Vivek Ramaswamy accurately predicted over a year in advance, or nearly a year in advance, that Joe Biden wasn't going to be the nominee. Here's a clip of Vivek on Fox News. This is February of this year, and he's actually referencing a prediction he made last year in 2023, where he predicted that the Democrats weren't going to run Joe Biden. Again, this is February of this year. Joe Biden dropped out just a few weeks ago.
Very bad day for President Biden. What do you think?
Look, I think the number one takeaway, Trace, is this. Joe Biden will not be the nominee. I said this last year. People dismissed it as some type of conspiracy theory. Today, I think it became that much more obvious. Play this out. Biden's own DOJ and special counsel is effectively releasing a report that undermines the case for him to actually be a candidate for the U.S. presidency, right as Biden's poll numbers are cratering. We have to do the math, skate to where the puck is going, not fall for the deflection. But I do think what they're planning for is to sideline Biden as the nominee, trot in a different puppet instead. That's the most significant takeaway from tonight.
Look, there are some people who are just always ahead of the trends, and Vivek is proving himself to be someone who is accurately forecasting what is down the road. And I don't think, it's just that he's gotten lucky on these predictions. I think, sometimes when you just look with a clear view at what's going on, it's not that difficult to ascertain and predict what the outcome will be. Sometimes 2 + 2 really is 4. Now, Vivek went on Hannity I think this was last night, and has a stark warning not only for Trump, but Republicans in general, if Trump wins the presidential debate.
One thing I want to caution against, Sean, is exactly what happened in June. What I expect is that Donald Trump will once again run circles around Kamala Harris, just as he did with Joe Biden in that last debate. The question is that going to be good for us in winning this election or not? Because last time around, it was the catalyst for something drastic happening afterwards, which is in that case, swapping out Joe Biden as the nominee. And I think if Kamala Harris really does tank in this debate, and I think there's a decent chance that happens, I think there are strange things that could happen between now and November, because the Democrats, they have been playing this as, in some ways, one step ahead.
Okay, so they go back and forth on this exchange, and basically Hannity asks, are you implying that Kamala Harris isn't going to be the nominee? Are you implying that the Democrats are going to swap out Kamala Harris the same way that they swapped out Joe Biden, even though we're just weeks away from the election?
No, I don't think it's going to be a change in the candidates. The ballots have already been printed, but I do think that we have a machine that we're up against that has demonstrated that it is going to go to great measures to defeat Donald Trump. You trace this back over the last year and a half. You've got prosecutions. You've got civil cases. You've got extrajudicial attempts to remove him from the ballot. They told us Joe Biden was definitively going to be the nominee, then negotiated for the earliest ever presidential debate in U.S. history because they knew there was a good chance Biden would underperform. Once he did, they swapped him out. So the two scenarios are either Kamala Harris overperforms. I don't expect that to happen. Or what I do expect to happen is Donald Trump to seriously defeat her in this debate as he did last time around. But don't expect that to be the end of this election. I think there's going to be more tricks left up their sleeve.
Now, what's interesting about his prediction is I had also thought that something bad was going to happen, but quite frankly, I thought what was going to happen was that Judge Merchan was going to sentence Trump to prison, in the New York hush money trial case. And obviously, well, now that sentencing has been deferred till after the election. What's interesting about that is the reasoning that Merchan wanted to delay it is because he didn't want to give the impression that he was trying to influence the election. My prediction, or my feel on that, though, is that this actually indicates that Merchan does want to put Trump in jail, and he realized that putting Trump in jail right before the election would actually prove Trump's point and help Trump in the polls. Remember, every time Trump was indicted, when Trump went to trial, every time Democrats have thrown something at him, Trump went up in the polls. So it's interesting to me that, Merchan has now delayed the case, which again, I think indicates that he did want to put Trump in jail. But I thought that was going to be the Democrats' next big move. Okay, let's just lock him up. So what could happen next? Do you think Vivek Ramaswamy's prediction is true and that there's something crazy that could happen? If so, what would it be? Or do you think it's just, fear mongering and there's nothing to look at here? Let me know your thoughts on anything I covered in this video, from Vivek's prediction to the polling numbers and CNN's analysis. If you haven't already, please be sure to give me a thumbs up. I know it's a simple thing to ask, but it really does help me in the algorithm to reach more viewers like you. Be sure to smash that subscribe button and to check out one of these videos.